Zane had always dreamed of something bigger than his small life as a mechanic aboard an exploration ship. He had traveled to many strange places, met a lot of interesting beings, and seen things that most humans only heard about in stories. But nothing compared to the letter that arrived on his desk one quiet afternoon. The letter wasn't like the usual contracts, repair orders, or maintenance requests he received. This one was different. It was an invitation. And not just any invitation. It was an invitation to a royal wedding on the planet Velar, a world far away from Earth. Zane stared at the letter, blinking in disbelief. The words were written in a flowing script he had never seen before, but somehow he understood them perfectly. The letter spoke of a grand event, a wedding of the highest importance to be held in the palace of the royal family. It was an invitation to him, a simple mechanic from Earth, to attend the wedding as a guest. He knew about Velar, of course. The planet was known for its advanced technology and powerful monarchy. The Velarians were a proud species, a race of aliens with a long and rich history. They had been cautious about interacting with other worlds, especially humans. But somehow Zane had received an invitation to this special event. He didn't know why or how, but it didn't matter. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he couldn't pass it up. The journey to Velar was long and filled with excitement. Zane had never traveled so far from home. His ship, an old but reliable model, hurtled through the vast emptiness of space. Zane spent his time reading up on Velarian culture, trying to understand their customs and how to behave at a royal wedding. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he wanted to make a good impression. When the ship finally landed on Velar, Zane was amazed by the beauty of the planet. The city he arrived in was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, shimmering buildings reached toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the light from the nearby twin suns. The streets were wide and lined with trees that seemed to glow in the soft, purple light of the alien world. Velarians moved about the streets, some walking and others riding sleek, hovercraft-like vehicles. Zane's invitation had included instructions on where to go upon arrival. He followed the directions, his heart pounding with excitement and nerves. The palace was located at the heart of the city, its towering spires visible from nearly every corner of Velar. As Zane approached, he could see large groups of people gathered outside, some of them human and others alien, all dressed in their finest attire. When he entered the palace grounds, Zane was struck by the grandeur of the place. The walls were made of smooth, metallic surfaces that seemed to shift colors with the light. Giant windows offered sweeping views of the city below, and the air was filled with the hum of advanced technology. He followed the crowd into the grand hall where the wedding ceremony was set to take place. The room was massive, far larger than anything Zane had ever seen. At the center was a large altar, surrounded by strange but beautiful flowers that seemed to pulse with light. The floor beneath his feet was made of glass, and Zane could see that it was suspended over a pool of water that sparkled like diamonds. Zane was one of many guests in attendance, and though he was a little out of place in his plain clothes compared to the elegant Velarians around him, no one seemed to mind. There were representatives from all over the galaxy, alien diplomats, wealthy traders, and powerful leaders. Everyone was there to witness the wedding of Prince Kaldor, the heir to the Velarian throne. As the ceremony began, Zane found himself in awe of the traditions he was witnessing. The Velarians had their own unique way of celebrating love and marriage, and it was unlike anything Zane had ever seen. The air was thick with an ancient kind of magic, a sense of history and ritual that felt both strange and beautiful. Zane's attention was soon drawn to one person in particular, Princess Alara. She was stunning, her features delicate and otherworldly, and she stood out even in such a grand setting. She wore a gown made of shimmering fabric that seemed to change color with every step she took. Her long hair cascaded down her back, glowing softly in the light, and her eyes, dark as the night, seemed to hold the mysteries of the universe. Zane couldn't help but be captivated by her. He had seen many beautiful women in his travels, but there was something different about her. There was a strength in her gaze, a quiet confidence that made her stand out from the rest of the guests. It wasn't long before Zane noticed that Princess Alara was looking at him. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It was as if the rest of the world didn't matter anymore. Alara's gaze was intense, filled with curiosity and something more, a silent recognition, as if she knew him even though they had never met before. Zane's heart raced, but he didn't know what to do. He was just a guest at the wedding, a simple human who had somehow ended up in the midst of this incredible celebration. But Alara's gaze lingered, and when the ceremony ended, she made her way toward him. When she reached him, she smiled, her eyes still locked on his. "You are not from here," she said softly, her voice both melodic and mysterious. "How did you come to be at my father's wedding?" Zane was taken aback by the question. He had no idea how to respond. He wasn't a diplomat or a nobleman. He wasn't even supposed to be here. I was invited," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I'm just a mechanic from Earth." Alara raised an eyebrow, her expression shifting slightly as if she were trying to read him. "A mechanic, you say? And yet you stand here among the most powerful people in the galaxy. I'm curious, Earthman, how is it that you are so fortunate?" Zane felt his face flush. He wasn't sure how to explain that he was just a lucky recipient of an invitation to a royal wedding. But something in Alara's eyes told him that she wasn't asking for a simple answer. She was probing, trying to understand the mystery behind this strange human. Before he could respond, the ceremony began to wind down. The guests started to move toward the banquet tables, and Alara excused herself, but not before giving him a knowing smile. "I hope our paths cross again, Earthman." Zane stood there for a moment, stunned. What had just happened? He had never been one to attract attention, let alone the attention of someone so powerful. But there was no time to dwell on it. The wedding was over, and the party had begun. As Zane moved toward the banquet area, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. Everything was different now. He wasn't just a guest at an alien wedding. He was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The wedding had ended, but Zane's mind was still buzzing from the events of the evening. The palace was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, as the guests moved about, enjoying the grand banquet that had been laid out. But despite the celebrations all around him, Zane could not shake the feeling that something had shifted within him, something that had started the moment he met Princess Alara. As he made his way through the crowd, he noticed that many of the other guests seemed to be in deep conversation or engaging in political discussions. Zane, though, felt like a fish out of water. He had never been the type to mingle in such circles. But even in this sea of diplomats, royals, and wealthy traders, his thoughts kept returning to Alara. She was unlike anyone he had ever met before, beautiful, yes, but also strong, determined, and mysterious. He wasn't sure what had drawn her to him, why she had singled him out among so many others. But he couldn't deny that there was something special about the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken to him with such intensity. It was as if she saw something in him, something that no one else had ever seen. Just as Zane was lost in thought, a voice interrupted his musings. "I see you're still standing here alone, Earthman." Zane turned to find Princess Alara standing before him. She was no longer in the ceremonial dress she had worn for the wedding, but instead she wore a more casual outfit, something simple yet elegant. Her long, dark hair was now loosely tied back, and she had a relaxed, almost playful smile on her face. I wasn't sure where to go," Zane said, still trying to process everything that had happened. "This is all a little overwhelming for me." Alara chuckled softly, the sound like a melody. "I can imagine. You are a long way from home." Zane nodded, glancing around at the grand hall filled with foreign beings. The wealth and power of the guests were evident in their attire and mannerisms. He felt out of place here, but Alara's presence made him feel like he wasn't entirely alone. "I never expected to be invited to a wedding like this," Zane said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't belong here." Alara's smile softened. "Sometimes life places us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand why at first." There was something about the way she spoke that made Zane feel as though she wasn't just talking about the wedding. She seemed to be speaking to him on a deeper level, as if there was more to their meeting than mere coincidence. "I suppose you're right," Zane replied, his voice quieter now. "But I'm still not sure why I'm here. What's my role in all this?" Alara's eyes darkened slightly, and for a moment Zane thought he saw a flicker of something, concern maybe, cross her face. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "I invited you here for a reason, Zane," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father, King Varath, is in danger, and so is the kingdom." Zane raised an eyebrow, not quite understanding what she meant. "Danger? How?" Ilara looked around, as though making sure no one was listening. She leaned in closer to Zane, lowering her voice even further. "There are those within the royal court who seek to overthrow my father," she explained. "There are factions who believe Velar should be ruled by a different leader, someone who would bring about more power for themselves, rather than for the good of the kingdom." Zane frowned, trying to process the gravity of her words. "So what does that have to do with me?" "I need someone I can trust," Ilara said, her gaze never leaving Zane's. "Someone who is not involved in the politics of this world, someone who can help me navigate this chaos." Zane's mind raced. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't a warrior or a leader. He was just a mechanic, an ordinary man from Earth. He had no experience in royal politics, no knowledge of how to handle the kind of power struggles that seemed to be unfolding in Velar. "I don't know how I can help," Zane said honestly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm just a guest here," Ilara smiled, but it was a smile tinged with sadness. "Sometimes, Zane, the right person isn't the one who knows the most or has the most experience. The right person is the one who is willing to stand up when everyone else is afraid to do so." Her words hit Zane harder than he expected. There was a weight to her gaze, a depth of emotion that made him feel both uncomfortable and compelled at the same time. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. Helping Ilara meant risking everything he had, his life, his freedom, even his future. "I don't know if I'm the right person," Zane said quietly, looking away from her. "But I can't stand by and do nothing. If there's something I can do to help, I'll do it." Ilara's eyes brightened, and she placed a hand on his arm, a gesture that felt surprisingly intimate given the circumstances. "Thank you, Zane," she said softly. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Zane wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but as he looked into her eyes, he felt a sense of resolve building within him. He had come to Velar as a guest, someone who was just passing through, but now he was part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet meetings, secret conversations, and tense moments. Zane found himself becoming more involved in the inner workings of the royal family's struggle for control of Velar. Ilara had introduced him to some of her most trusted allies, who were all determined to protect her and her father from those who sought to harm them. Zane did his best to stay out of the politics, focusing on what he could do to help. He had no idea how to navigate the palace intrigue, but he quickly realized that his skills as a mechanic were more useful than he had thought. He repaired communications devices, fixed security systems, and even helped design a few escape routes for Ilara in case things went terribly wrong. But as much as he worked, there was always the underlying tension. The people who wanted to overthrow the king were growing bolder, and the palace walls felt like they were closing in around them. Zane couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would force him to make a choice. One evening, as Zane sat alone in his room, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Ilara. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice urgent. Zane stood up, his heart racing. "What's going on?" "We've just learned something," she said, her expression serious. "There's a plan in motion to capture my father and place him under house arrest. If they succeed, they will have control of Velar, and the entire kingdom will fall into chaos." Zane's stomach churned at the thought. "What can we do?" "We fight," Ilara said, her eyes blazing with determination. "We can't let them take my father, and we can't let Velar fall into the hands of people who don't care about the future of this planet." Zane nodded, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He wasn't just some mechanic from Earth. He was part of this now, and he would do whatever it took to protect Ilara and the kingdom she loved. As the days passed, the tension grew. The rebels were making their move, and Zane knew that the time for action was fast approaching. He had come to Velar for a wedding, but now he was fighting for something far greater, a chance to change the future of an entire world. Zane wasn't sure what the outcome would be. He wasn't sure if they would succeed or if they would all fall. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Ilara face this fight alone. Not now, not ever. The tension in the palace had reached a breaking point. Every hallway, every room, every corner seemed to hum with the weight of what was coming. Zane had never imagined he would be part of something so monumental. He had come to Velar as a guest, but now his life was entangled in the kingdom's struggle for survival. Princess Ilara's plan to protect her father, King Verath, was taking shape. It wasn't a simple matter of fighting off a few rebels. No, this was a fight for the very heart of Velar, for its future and its people. The enemy was inside the palace, hiding in plain sight. The royal court was filled with traitors. Noblemen, politicians, and even some of the king's closest advisors had pledged their allegiance to the rebels. Zane knew that time was running out. The rebellion was closing in, and Alara's enemies were becoming bolder by the day. Despite the danger, Alara remained calm. She was a true leader, one who thought several steps ahead, and it was clear to Zane that her father's kingdom had been built on her strength. She had a way of making everyone around her feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. Her quiet confidence gave Zane the courage to push forward, even when the odds seemed impossible. They had a plan, but plans like these always had a way of falling apart. Zane wasn't naive enough to think that just because they had a strategy, it would work out. But he trusted Alara. He trusted her judgment, her resolve, and her ability to navigate the chaos that had surrounded them. He had learned that in the short time they had spent together. The plan was simple in theory. They needed to get to King Varath before the rebels could. Alara's most loyal supporters had already begun evacuating the palace's hidden chambers, securing vital information and key personnel. The king, however, remained in the throne room, believing himself safe behind the walls of his palace. The rebels' final strike would come at dawn, and Zane knew that if they didn't act soon, it would be too late. One evening, as they prepared for the final stages of the plan, Alara summoned Zane to her private chambers. When he entered, he found her standing by a window looking out over the sprawling city below. Her face was calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but low. "What we're about to do, it won't just affect me and my father, it'll affect the whole kingdom. I need you to understand that, Zane. You're not just helping me, you're helping all of Velar." Zane nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. He had never wanted to be a hero, never sought fame or power. But now he was part of something that was much larger than himself. He had a choice: stand by and do nothing, or fight for the future of an entire world. It wasn't an easy decision, but it wasn't a hard one either. There was no way he could walk away now. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, I'll stand by you." Alara turned to him, her gaze softening. She stepped closer, her presence filling the room. "I knew I could count on you," she said, her voice warm. "But there's one more thing I need from you, Zane." Zane raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Alara took a deep breath. "You'll be the one to get my father out of the throne room. You'll have to lead him through the hidden tunnels and get him to safety. I can't do it myself. If they see me with him, they'll know we're trying to escape, and everything will fall apart." Zane didn't hesitate. He had no doubt in his mind that he would do whatever it took to protect the king. "You can count on me," he said firmly. Alara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with gratitude. Then, with a small but determined smile, she turned away. "We'll move in the morning. I'll give you the signal and we'll move quickly. Once we start, there's no turning back." The next morning, the air in the palace was thick with anticipation. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as he waited in the shadows, the weight of his mission heavy on his shoulders. He had trained for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared him for the responsibility he now carried. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was the key to Velar's survival. The plan was set in motion. Alara had arranged for a distraction at the palace gates, drawing the attention of the rebels and their loyalists. As soon as the rebels began to focus on the gates, Zane would make his move. He would slip into the throne room, find King Varath, and escort him through the secret tunnels that ran beneath the palace. They would be out of the palace before the rebels even knew what had happened. Zane moved swiftly, his heart racing with every step. He had no time to waste. As he reached the throne room, he was met by a pair of guards who eyed him suspiciously. Zane had no time for pleasantries. He acted quickly, using his knowledge of the palace's layout to disarm the guards and knock them out without raising an alarm. He couldn't afford to be seen, not yet. Inside the throne room, King Varath was seated on his throne, his expression a mix of concern and frustration. The king had always been a man of strength, but now his age and the weight of the situation seemed to have caught up with him. "Your Majesty," Zane said, bowing slightly as he approached, "we have to go, the rebels are coming." King Varath's eyes widened in surprise. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, standing up from his throne. "I'm not going anywhere." Zane could see the stubbornness in the king's eyes, but he also knew that the king had no choice. The rebellion was upon them, and they needed to escape. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Zane said, his voice calm but firm. "The palace is no longer safe. We need to move now." King Verath hesitated for a moment, his pride struggling with the reality of the situation. But in the end, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "Lead the way." Zane turned and began to move toward the hidden entrance to the tunnels. As he did, he could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. If they didn't get out of the palace in time, everything would be lost. Alara's plan depended on them, and Zane couldn't afford to fail. They moved quickly through the dark, narrow tunnels beneath the palace, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the walls. Zane glanced back at King Verath, who was struggling to keep up. The king was not as young as he once was, and the stress of the situation was taking its toll. Zane couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the man. Despite everything, he was still standing strong. They reached the exit, a small hidden door that led to a secluded part of the palace grounds. But as Zane opened the door, he was met with an unexpected sight. The rebels had already made their move. They had surrounded the palace, and there was no escape. Zane's heart sank. They were trapped. "We have to find another way out," Zane muttered under his breath. "We'll have to go through the city." King Verath shook his head. "It's too dangerous. The rebels will be waiting for us." Zane didn't have time to argue. The rebels were closing in, and he knew they had to act fast. "We'll have to risk it," he said firmly. "Follow me, Your Majesty." Together, they stepped out into the city, and Zane knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. They were no longer just escaping the palace. They were fighting for the future of Velar. Zane's heart raced as he stepped out into the open city streets, the cool breeze of Velar's twin moons brushing against his face. The streets, which had once been bustling with life and celebration, were now eerily quiet. The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the distance, and the hum of city machinery had been replaced by an unsettling silence. The rebels had come. The city was no longer a safe place. Zane glanced at King Verath, who was struggling to keep up. The king's age was beginning to show, and his usual strength seemed to have faded in the face of the rebellion that threatened to tear his kingdom apart. Zane knew they couldn't waste any time. The palace was surrounded, and the city was crawling with rebels. "We need to move quickly," Zane said, his voice steady but urgent. "We can't stay here." King Verath nodded silently, his expression grim. Zane wasn't sure if the king was even aware of the gravity of the situation. The once mighty ruler of Velar now seemed like a man out of time, struggling to hold on to a throne that was slipping from his grasp. Zane couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. No one had prepared him for this. The two of them moved through the streets as quietly as possible, taking back alleys and side streets to avoid detection. Zane's mind raced with thoughts of Alara. He had to get the king to safety, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this rebellion than just a political power struggle. He had seen the way Alara had acted, the way she had spoken about the threats to her father. It wasn't just about a throne, it was about something much bigger. As they moved deeper into the city, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Zane held up a hand, signaling for the king to stop. He peered around a corner, spotting a group of rebels up ahead. They were armed and looking for anyone who might be trying to escape. Zane's pulse quickened. They couldn't afford to be caught now. "We'll have to go around," Zane whispered, motioning for the king to follow him. They moved quietly, taking a longer route through the winding streets. The tension in the air was thick. Zane's instincts were on high alert. Every sound, every movement seemed to put them closer to danger. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. As they rounded another corner, Zane stopped dead in his tracks. A group of rebels stood directly in front of them, blocking the path. There were 5 of them, all armed, and they didn't look friendly. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, instinctively placing himself between the rebels and King Verath. One of the rebels, a tall woman with short-cropped hair and a scar running down her cheek, stepped forward. "What do we have here?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "A king and his little friend, you're both a long way from safety." Zane's mind raced. He had to think fast. "We're not looking for trouble," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We just need to get out of the city. Let us pass." The woman laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You think we're just going to let you walk away? The king's head is worth more than all the riches in Velar. You won't get away that easily." Zane knew they didn't have time to argue. The rebels were closing in, and the king's life was at stake. Without thinking, Zane lunged forward, grabbing the nearest rebel's weapon and disarming him. The sudden movement caught the rebels off guard, and Zane used the momentary distraction to knock the woman with the scar to the ground. King Verath stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold in front of him. Zane had hoped the king would run, but it seemed he was too paralyzed by fear to act. The remaining rebels closed in on Zane, but he was ready. He'd fought before, though never like this. This wasn't about honor or training, it was about survival. Zane moved quickly, using the momentum from his last strike to take out another rebel. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't stop. His body moved on its own, each action instinctual, driven by a desperate need to protect the king. But then something unexpected happened. From behind, a voice called out, "Hold your fire!" The rebels stopped in their tracks. Zane froze, his heart in his throat, as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Alara. She stepped into the street, her eyes locked onto Zane's. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation. She was in control, as always. "Get away from him," Alara said coldly, her voice commanding. The rebels immediately stepped back, confusion and fear evident on their faces. Zane couldn't believe his eyes. "Alara," he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "I had to make sure you were safe," she said, her eyes flicking to the rebels. "And it seems I've arrived just in time." Zane was still in shock, his hands shaking as he dropped the weapon he had taken from the rebel. He couldn't believe it. Alara had come to save them, but there was something more. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about saving her father anymore. It was about something far more complicated. "Get him to safety," Alara said, nodding toward the king. "The palace will fall if we don't act fast. We need to move." Zane didn't need to be told twice. He turned to King Verath, whose shock seemed to be slowly fading. Alara's presence had somehow given him the courage he needed. He was still the king of Velar, and it was time to act like it. Together, they moved quickly through the streets, Alara leading the way. Zane could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never imagined he'd be running through an alien city, trying to protect the king from an uprising. Yet here he was, caught in the middle of a political struggle that could change the fate of an entire planet. As they moved deeper into the city, the tension began to rise again. The path was becoming more dangerous. The rebels were closing in, and Zane could hear the sound of their footsteps behind them. The city was no longer a safe haven. It was a war zone, and there was no way to know who to trust. But Zane couldn't stop now. He couldn't afford to fail. He had come to Velar as a guest, but now he was part of this world. He had a role to play in its future, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. They reached a safe house, a small, hidden building on the outskirts of the city, and Zane breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't over yet, but for the moment, they were safe. King Verath collapsed into a chair, his face drawn with exhaustion. Alara moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll rest here for a while," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't stay long. We need to regroup, figure out our next move." Zane nodded, his own body aching from the fight. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: they were in this together, and whatever the future held, he was ready to face it.